Hello everyone, I know you are going to use this video for falling asleep, so before that, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know where you are from. Also, what time is it? Lena stood frozen in the doorway, the soft hum of the refrigerator her only companion in the otherwise silent house. She had only just moved in, a fresh start, far from the chaos of the city. The house was older than she expected, ancient even, and there was something about it that felt off. But the real question that kept pulling at her mind was, why couldn't she shake the feeling that she wasn't alone? The moving truck had barely pulled away when she felt it. The air was thick, like it was holding its breath, and though she didn't want to admit it, she swore she heard faint footsteps upstairs. But when she checked, there was no one there. Just silence. It was supposed to be a fresh start, an escape from her past, a place to gather herself after everything. But the house had other ideas. The first night was the hardest. She lay in her bed, tossing and turning, trying to convince herself it was just the house settling. Just the wind. There were no real sounds. Nothing tangible, but still, there was this oppressive presence, like eyes were watching her from every corner. It wasn't the usual sensation of being creeped out by unfamiliar spaces. It was deeper, more primal. A gut feeling that something was wrong. At 3:07 a.m., Lena heard it again. The unmistakable sound of footsteps. Slow, heavy, like someone was walking from room to room. Deliberately avoiding the creaky spots on the floor, her heart raced. She knew no one else was in the house, and the thought of checking it out was absurd. But she couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was making the sound wasn't human. The next day, Lena went into town. The air felt different outside, fresher, and she tried to shake off the lingering unease as she walked the quiet streets. She needed something to calm her nerves. A coffee, maybe, or a chat with the locals. She found a small cafe tucked between two shops, the kind of place where time seemed to slow down. "First time in town?" asked the woman behind the counter, her voice soft, yet her eyes sharp. Lena nodded, offering a strained smile. "Yeah, just moved in actually. Up on Hillcrest Avenue." The woman's smile faltered for a moment. She didn't speak for a few beats, and Lena felt a prickling unease run down her spine. "Hillcrest, you say? That old house on the hill?" Lena's curiosity piqued. "Yeah, that's the one. I don't know much about it, but it seems like a nice place. A bit quiet, though." "Maybe too quiet." The woman's expression darkened. "Be careful with quiet places," she said, her voice low. "There's more to silence than meets the eye. People don't last long up there." Lena raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" The woman seemed to hesitate, glancing over her shoulder, as if making sure no one was listening. "Don't take this the wrong way," she said, "but the house you're in, it's not like other houses. There's a history there, and it doesn't let go of its residents easily. Some things don't change, no matter how many people move in and out. And some things follow." The words hit her like a cold slap, but the woman quickly added, "Just a local story. You know how it is around here. People get bored, start making up tales. Don't mind me." She gave a nervous laugh and quickly changed the subject. Lena didn't know what to think. Was it a warning, or just gossip from a small town? But as she walked back to the house, the unease she had felt earlier in the day returned, stronger than ever. That night, she lay awake again, the silence of the house pressing against her like a heavy weight. The air felt different tonight. It was cold, unnaturally so, and it seemed to hang, thick and suffocating, in the corners of her bedroom. She pulled the covers tightly around her, trying to ignore the persistent feeling that something was wrong. Her mind was racing, caught between the lingering memory of the woman's words and the stillness around her. Was it all just her imagination, or was there truly something in the house? The footsteps from the night before echoed in her memory, The chilling sound of someone, or something, moving through the dark. She almost convinced herself to ignore it. It was probably nothing. She'd heard stories of people letting their minds wander, making mountains out of molehills. It could be a raccoon in the attic, or the pipes settling. It could be... Lena froze. From upstairs, she heard the unmistakable sound of a door creaking open. Slowly, softly, then a shuffle of footsteps. Not the soft, distant sounds she'd heard before, but something deliberate, something too close. Her breath caught in her throat. Every fiber of her being screamed at her to move, to run, to leave, but her feet felt glued to the floor. She listened, straining against the eerie quiet of the house, trying to make sense of what she was hearing. Was it a person? Was it something else? Then she heard it, a low whisper, barely audible, but distinct. It came from the direction of the hallway, just outside her bedroom door. A voice. It was slow, almost guttural. Lena. She jerked upright in bed, her heart pounding. She hadn't imagined it. Someone, or something, had called her name. Lena grabbed her phone from the nightstand, her hands trembling as she dialed the first number that came to mind. Her mother. It was late, but she needed someone to talk to, someone to reassure her that everything was fine, that she was just being paranoid. The phone rang twice before her mother answered with a groggy, "Lena, what's wrong?" Her voice shook as she spoke. "Mom, I think there's something in the house. I keep hearing things. Footsteps. Voices. It's like something's here with me." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and Lena's stomach churned. "Lena," her mother said, her voice suddenly stern, "listen to me very carefully. You need to leave. Right now." "What?" "You need to get out of that house. It's not safe, Lena. Do you hear me? I've been trying to tell you, but you wouldn't listen. You have to leave, or it will come for you too." Lena was frozen, her breath coming in short gasps. Her mother's voice was trembling with urgency. "What do you mean? What's going on?" But before her mother could answer, there was a loud bang from the hallway, followed by the sound of something heavy hitting the floor. The whispering voice from earlier returned. Louder now, more desperate. "Lena." The call dropped. Panic surged through her, and for a moment, she didn't know what to do. She grabbed her keys, her legs unsteady beneath her, and rushed toward the door. She didn't stop to think, to question what was happening. She just needed to get out, to escape the suffocating presence in the house. But before she could reach the front door, a sudden coldness swept through her, freezing her in place. It felt like a presence, a heavy, unseen weight that hovered just behind her. And then she heard it, again clearer this time. A voice, but not from the hallway. It was right behind her. "Lena?" Her blood ran cold as she slowly turned around. There, in the doorway of the living room, stood a figure. Shadowy, indistinct, but unmistakably there. And its eyes, those cold, soulless eyes, locked onto hers. Everything went dark. Lena's heart pounded in her chest as the darkness enveloped her. She tried to scream, but her voice caught in her throat. Strangled by the sudden weight of fear pressing down on her, she couldn't move, couldn't breathe. It felt as if the very air around her had turned to stone, suffocating her, crushing her chest under its invisible weight. The figure in the doorway remained still, a dark silhouette against the faint light of the hallway. Its eyes, those cold, soulless eyes, pierced through her like twin daggers, locking her in place. She wanted to run, wanted to escape, but her body refused to obey. Every muscle screamed in protest, and yet she couldn't make herself move. It was as if she were paralyzed. "Lena." The voice was soft, almost soothing, but there was no mistaking the underlying malice in it. It was a voice she knew didn't belong to any living being. The figure didn't step forward. It didn't need to. The very presence of it seemed to stretch the space between them, making it feel like it was all around her, closing in on her from every direction. Her breath was shallow now, quick and frantic. She had to escape. She had to get out of the house. But even as the thought flickered through her mind, the oppressive darkness around her grew heavier, more suffocating. She could feel the coldness creeping into her skin, seeping into her bones. Every inch of her body screamed for release, for air, but it was like she was trapped inside a nightmare that refused to end. "Don't go," the voice whispered again, its tone now full of an unsettling hunger. Lena could feel it now, the weight of the presence pressing against her back, the sensation of invisible fingers trailing across her skin. She fought to turn, to break free from whatever was keeping her rooted in place, but her body betrayed her, unwilling to obey. And then, as if sensing her panic, the figure in the doorway moved. It was so quick, so impossibly fast, that Lena didn't even see it until it was standing directly in front of her. It towered over her, its presence overwhelming. The coldness intensified, freezing her in place. A hand, pale and elongated, reached toward her, its fingers outstretched as though it meant to touch her. Lena recoiled, her body finally responding to the overwhelming instinct to run, to escape. She stumbled backward, crashing into the nearest wall, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "Lena," the voice whispered again, and this time, it was right next to her ear. She could feel the coldness of it, the breath that wasn't breath at all, but something far darker, more sinister. Her hands trembled as she reached for the doorknob, desperate to get out. She threw the door open and bolted into the night, her feet barely touching the ground as she ran. She didn't know where she was going. All she knew was that she had to get away. The air outside was cool and crisp, a stark contrast to the suffocating heat she had left behind in the house. The silence of the night was deafening, but it was a silence she welcomed. It felt like a reprieve, a moment of safety, even if it was only temporary. Lena's pulse throbbed in her temples, her mind a whirl of panic and confusion. She wanted to turn back to make sure it wasn't following her, but something deep inside her told her that she couldn't look back. Not now. Not ever. The house loomed behind her, its dark windows like empty eyes watching her retreat. She could feel the weight of the presence still, as though it was clinging to the very air she breathed. But for the moment, at least, she was free. At least, she hoped she was. Lena didn't stop running. Her legs burned with the effort, but she pushed herself harder, as if the very act of running could keep whatever it was that haunted her at bay. The streets blurred around her, the familiar town fading into a strange, unfamiliar blur. She didn't know where she was going. Didn't care. She just had to get away. As she rounded a corner, she came upon a small park, the trees casting long shadows under the moonlight. The streetlights flickered above, their pale yellow glow offering little comfort in the empty space. Lena stopped, her chest heaving as she bent over, hands on her knees, trying to catch her breath. Her mind raced. She couldn't stop thinking about what had happened back at the house. What that thing had been. What it had wanted from her. Her heart thundered in her chest, and she forced herself to stand up, wiping the sweat from her forehead. The park felt eerily still. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched again. Her eyes darted around, searching the darkness. For a moment, she thought she saw something. Just a flicker in the corner of her eye. But when she turned, nothing was there. Only the wind rustling through the trees. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling of dread that clung to her like a second skin. And then, from behind her, she heard it again. A whisper. "Lena." Her heart skipped a beat. She spun around, her breath catching in her throat. The voice was so close, so real, that she could almost feel it brushing against her skin. But there was no one there. No figure standing in the shadows. Just the empty, silent park. Panic surged through her again, and she took a step back, her eyes scanning the darkness. Was she losing her mind? Had the fear and exhaustion finally gotten to her? Lena. The voice echoed again, and this time, she recognized something in it. A sense of familiarity. A sense of longing. It was as though it knew her, calling out to her, begging her to come back. Her breath hitched. She couldn't ignore it. She couldn't run any longer. Someone, was trying to reach her, and she had to know what it was. But before she could take another step, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was a woman, her features pale and gaunt, her eyes hollow. She wore a tattered dress, the fabric torn and stained. Her hair hung in matted strands around her face, and her skin was ashen, almost translucent in the moonlight. Lena froze, her heart slamming against her ribcage as the woman's eyes locked onto hers. "You shouldn't have come back," the woman said, her voice a rasping whisper. "He's still waiting." Lena opened her mouth to speak, but the words wouldn't come. She was paralyzed, unable to move, her eyes locked on the woman before her. The woman smiled, a slow, unsettling grin that didn't reach her eyes. "You're not alone, Lena. He's always with you now. He won't let you go." The woman's words reverberated in Lena's mind, echoing louder than her racing heart. She stumbled backward, her legs giving way beneath her. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The world around her spun, the shadows twisting and curling like living things. Lena. The voice, the whisper, it was everywhere now. It was inside her head, inside her thoughts, a presence. A thing that had been waiting for her all along. And as the woman took a step closer, the night air grew cold, colder than it had ever been before. The woman's smile twisted further, stretching unnaturally across her face. Her hollow eyes locked onto Lena with a predatory gleam. For a moment, Lena thought she might pass out. She could feel her pulse in her throat, her breath shallow, her legs unsteady beneath her. Her mind screamed at her to run, but her body couldn't seem to respond. The woman was closing in, each step an echo of doom in the silent night. "You should have left when you had the chance," the woman whispered, her voice almost tender now, but it held something else, a dark promise. "But you stayed. Now, you'll see." Lena wanted to scream, to tear away from this nightmare, but the words caught in her throat. She could barely even bring herself to move, her limbs frozen in place like lead. She tried to remind herself that this wasn't real, that this had to be a hallucination, brought on by the stress of the house. But the woman's cold eyes and her bone, chilling presence told her otherwise. Lena took a shaky step back, but the ground beneath her feet felt unstable, as though it were giving way. Every instinct in her screamed to run, but the woman's voice came again, sharper now. "He's already here." Before Lena could react, a cold wind swept through the park, making the trees bend and creak. The woman's tattered dress fluttered in the wind, as though it had a life of its own. Lena felt the temperature plummet, the air thickening around her. A presence, something ancient and powerful, settled over her, pressing down like a weight she could not shake. The woman took another step forward, her smile widening as she did. But the moment her foot touched the ground, Lena saw something strange. The earth around the woman's feet seemed to darken, as if the very soil had absorbed something dark and wicked, leaving a mark behind. "Who are you?" Lena finally managed to gasp, her voice a trembling whisper. The woman's eyes flickered, and for a moment, they looked almost sorrowful. She opened her mouth to speak, but before she could, a far-off noise cut through the air. A faint, eerie sound, like a distant wail. Lena's heart skipped in her chest, her breath catching in her throat. She turned quickly, searching the darkened park for the source of the noise. There was nothing. When she turned back to face the woman, she was gone. Just gone. The sudden emptiness left Lena feeling breathless, like the world had been torn away from her in one swift motion. The woman's presence, the tension in the air, it had all disappeared in an instant. But that didn't make Lena feel safe. If anything, it only made her more uneasy. The wailing noise came again, closer now. It wasn't human, it was inhuman. It sounded like the desperate cry of something trapped, something in pain. Lena's skin prickled as she turned in the direction of the sound, her legs shaking beneath her. Her eyes darted between the shadows, trying to make sense of what was happening. She couldn't stay here. She had to get back to the house. She had to... Her thoughts were interrupted by another sound, something worse than the wail. A rustling like a dry, brittle thing moving through the underbrush, skittering across the ground, too fast to be human. It was coming for her. Lena's feet moved before her mind could catch up. She didn't know where she was going, only that she needed to move, needed to get out of that park, before whatever was out there caught up with her. Her breath was ragged as she pushed herself forward, running toward the streets, the dim streetlights, her only guide in the suffocating darkness. But she wasn't fast enough. A sudden, piercing pain shot through her ankle, like something had grabbed her, yanked her down. She screamed, flailing as the unseen force jerked her to the ground, pulling her backward. Her hands scraped against the rough pavement, but there was no escape. She tried to stand, but the force was relentless, dragging her deeper into the darkness. The wail came again, closer, deafening. And then it stopped. The world fell silent. Lena's heart pounded, the silence louder now than the screams. She could feel the weight of the air pressing against her chest, the feeling of something closing in, something watching her from the shadows. She could sense it now, like it was just on the edge of her perception. Something powerful. Something ancient. Something that had been waiting for her to fall into its trap. And then it came. A shape rising from the shadows, a towering figure wrapped in tattered cloth, its eyes glowing a soft, sickly green. It was not human, not in any sense she understood. Its form was both distorted and too perfect, like a nightmare-given shape. Lena struggled, her breath coming in sharp, painful gasps. "What do you want from me?" she cried, but the creature didn't answer. Instead, it reached down with long, spindly fingers, lifting her off the ground like she weighed nothing at all. Her chest tightened, and for a moment, everything seemed to blur. She tried to scream, but the air around her seemed to press in, smothering her voice. The creature's eyes flickered, a light so cold it made her feel like her bones were turning to ice. It spoke, its voice like the scraping of metal against stone. "You should not have returned, Lena. He was waiting for you. He called to you." Lena's eyes widened in realization. The whispers, the footsteps, it was all connected. Who are you talking about?" The creature tilted its head slightly, and in that motion, Lena could see its true nature. Something far worse than she had ever imagined. The one who waits in the dark. Before Lena could respond, the air shifted again, colder now, and a gust of wind blew through the park. The creature released her, its eyes narrowing as it looked toward the house. A low growl, more like a rumble from the earth itself, came from deep within the creature's throat. "He's already found you." Lena's heart skipped a beat. She knew, deep down, that this was only the beginning. Whatever had been lurking in that house, whatever had followed her into this town, was far more terrifying than anything she could have imagined. She could feel its presence now, just beyond the veil of the world she knew, creeping closer with every second. The creature's form began to fade, its glowing eyes the last thing Lena saw before it disappeared into the shadows. But its words stayed with her, echoing in her mind, repeating like a chant. "Has already found you." Lena stumbled back, trying to make sense of everything she had just witnessed. She had to go back. She had to understand what was happening. Her mind swirled with confusion and fear as she turned back toward the house. The walk back was slow, agonizingly slow, as every step brought with it the oppressive weight of something waiting for her. She could feel it now, the presence in the house. That thing that had been lurking, watching, listening. It wasn't just the house that was haunted. It was her. And she had no idea what kind of monster she had unwittingly invited into her life. As she approached the house, the door stood open, a sliver of darkness beyond it. She hesitated at the threshold, her heart thumping in her chest. But before she could step inside, she heard it. A soft, distant whisper, like a voice carried by the wind. Lena, this time it wasn't just a voice. It was a feeling, a sensation, crawling up her spine, digging its claws into her skin. It was waiting. Lena stood frozen on the threshold of the house, the wind whistling through the trees around her, the silence pressing in from every direction. She had to go inside. She didn't have a choice. She knew that. But every instinct in her screamed to run in the opposite direction, to leave this place behind once and for all. To forget that she had ever heard that voice, felt that presence. But the door was wide open, as though it were inviting her back in. The darkness beyond the entryway stretched like an endless abyss, a void that seemed to breathe in time with her racing heart. She could almost hear it now, the subtle whisper of something, someone, waiting for her inside. Lena, her name drifted from the house again. Like a breeze carrying a secret, like a promise of something just out of reach. She didn't know how much longer she could stand there, torn between the need to escape and the terrifying pull that called her back inside. The last few hours felt like they had been stretched into an eternity. The woman in the park, the dark figure, the creature, everything was connected, tied together by something ancient and incomprehensible. She had been running for her life, but now the house had drawn her back, and she could feel the weight of its gaze upon her as surely as she could feel the cold air against her skin. Taking a deep breath, Lena stepped inside. As soon as her foot crossed the threshold, a chill washed over her, colder than anything she had ever felt. It sank into her bones, an icy grip that locked her in place. The door behind her creaked shut, though she hadn't touched it. She turned to look, but there was no sign of the outside world now. The house had swallowed her whole, leaving only the darkness within. Lena's pulse quickened. The hallway before her was dimly lit, the faintest trace of moonlight filtering through the dusty windows. She could hear nothing but the sound of her own breathing, shallow and erratic. Every step she took felt like it was echoing in the silence, as though the house itself was holding its breath. She hadn't meant to come back. She had planned to leave, to never look back. But the house, it had called her, lured her back with the promise of answers. And now she was here, in the belly of the beast. The faint, whispering voice grew louder the farther she ventured into the house, its sound like 1,000 secrets being whispered at once. The words were indecipherable, but the tone, oh, the tone, it was so familiar. It was as though it was speaking directly into her mind, pulling her deeper into the darkness. Lena walked down the narrow hallway, the floorboards creaking under her weight. She reached out for the railing on the stairs, her hand trembling as she placed it against the worn wood. The staircase spiraled upward, disappearing into the shadows above. She knew she had to go up there, that whatever was happening, whatever had been happening, was waiting for her on the second floor. But as her hand brushed against the banister, she felt something strange. A faint vibration, as though the house itself were alive, responding to her touch. She quickly withdrew her hand, her skin tingling as though something unseen had brushed against her. The whispering stopped abruptly, leaving only an eerie silence in its wake. It was as though the house had gone still, waiting for something to happen. Lena turned toward the stairs. Her legs felt weak, but she forced herself to climb. The darkness above seemed to grow heavier with each step, each creak of the stairs beneath her feet. At the top, the hallway stretched out before her, cold and oppressive. There were rooms to her left and right, but it was the door at the end of the hall that caught her attention. It was the only door that was slightly ajar. Her breath caught in her throat as she took a step toward it. She could feel it now. The weight of something that had been waiting behind that door. Something old and ancient. She was certain of it. This was where it all began. This was where the answers were. Lena's hand hovered over the door, her fingers trembling. She didn't want to open it. She didn't want to know what was on the other side. But she had no choice. She had already come too far. The door creaked as she pushed it open, the hinges groaning in protest. The room beyond was dark. But there was something about it, something in the air, that made her skin crawl. It was as if the darkness itself was watching her, waiting for her to make a move. Her eyes strained in the dim light, trying to make sense of the space before her. It looked like a study, or perhaps a library, but the air was thick with dust, the furniture covered in heavy white sheets. A single lamp flickered dimly on a desk in the corner, casting strange, distorted shadows across the walls. The room felt wrong, like it was frozen in time, a place that had been abandoned long ago. And yet, there was something familiar about it. Something that tugged at her memory, something she couldn't quite place. She stepped further into the room, her footsteps muffled by the thick carpet beneath her feet. As she moved toward the desk, her eyes fell on an old photograph resting on top of a stack of papers. She picked it up, her hands trembling. The photo was yellowed with age, the edges curling. It was a family portrait. Lena recognized her own face, but the people around her were strangers. A man and a woman stood beside her, their faces stern, their eyes cold. But it was the background that sent a chill racing down her spine. In the picture, behind the family, stood the very house she had just entered, the same house. But it looked different, older, more decayed. Lena's heart thudded in her chest as she turned the photo over. The back was scrawled with a single word, written in jagged handwriting. Mine. Her breath caught in her throat. What did it mean? What was the connection? She was about to put the photograph down when she heard it, the unmistakable sound of a door creaking open. Lena spun around, her heart racing. The door she had just entered had closed behind her, but it was now ajar once more. She stepped toward it, the air growing colder as she moved. Every step felt heavier, as if the weight of something ancient was bearing down on her. She pushed the door open, and what she saw beyond it took her breath away. The hallway outside had changed. The walls were no longer covered in dust and peeling wallpaper. Instead, they were lined with faded portraits of people she didn't recognize. People who looked at her with eyes full of sorrow and desperation. The once dark, oppressive hallway was now bathed in a sickly, unnatural light, and at the end of it stood a figure. A figure she recognized. The woman. Lena's breath caught in her throat. It was her, standing in the doorway at the end of the hall, her face twisted in that unsettling smile. Her hollow eyes fixed on Lena with an intensity that made her stomach churn. You shouldn't have come back, the woman said again, her voice like gravel. Now, he will take you too. Lena felt a cold chill spread through her chest. The shadows behind the woman shifted, darkening, writhing like living things. And then, as if summoned by the words, the floor beneath Lena's feet groaned, and the house seemed to exhale, a deep, rumbling sigh that echoed through the very walls. Lena turned to run, but her feet were glued to the floor. The presence that had been waiting for her, that had followed her into the house, had finally arrived. And this time, there would be no escaping. Lena's heart hammered in her chest, her pulse deafening in her ears as she struggled to move. Her body felt frozen, paralyzed by the weight of something oppressive, something ancient and malevolent that had been waiting for her all this time. The woman at the end of the hallway smiled again, but this time it wasn't the same unsettling grin she had seen before. It was something worse. It was triumphant. You can't run, Lena, the woman whispered, her voice carrying an almost mocking tone. "He's already here. You're not going anywhere." The words seemed to seep into Lena's bones, making her feel as though she was being drained, her energy stolen away by the very air around her. The house groaned, as if it were alive, the walls pressing in closer, the shadows on the ceiling growing darker and thicker, swirling like tendrils. Her mind screamed for her to run, to escape, but her feet refused to move. The woman in the doorway took a step forward, her feet making no sound as they glided over the floor. With every step, the temperature in the house dropped, the air growing heavier, thicker with an unnatural coldness. Lena's breath came in shallow gasps, visible in the freezing air. Her fingers trembled as they gripped the photograph tighter, as though the image of the family, her family, was the only thing anchoring her to reality. "Do you remember them, Lena?" The woman's voice cut through the oppressive silence. "Your parents. Your real parents. The ones who brought you here. Don't you remember? You were always meant to return." Lena's eyes widened. What do you mean?" Her voice cracked, barely a whisper as the words trembled out of her. The woman stepped forward again, now closer. So close that Lena could feel her breath, colder than the air itself, brushing against her face. "They've always been here. This house, this place, it calls to you. It always has." The woman's lips curled into a smile that was colder than ice. "You were never meant to escape, Lena. You were always meant to return." Lena's chest tightened. Memories, fragmented and disjointed, began to surface, rising like ghosts she had buried deep inside her mind. She saw flashes of faces, strange faces, unfamiliar, but somehow familiar. A child with pale blue eyes, staring at her through the cracks of a door. A man with dark hair, his face hidden in shadows. A woman, her mother. But not her mother, holding her hand in a darkened room, whispering something Lena couldn't quite understand. The woman's voice brought her back to the present. "You don't remember, do you?" she asked softly. "The house didn't want you to. But you were always meant to find it again. And now that you have..." The shadows in the hallway shifted, as though they were alive, swirling around the woman like a cloak. Lena felt a cold sweat bead on her forehead as she tried to step back, but her feet still wouldn't obey. She was trapped. The woman's eyes were glowing now, the hollow sockets replaced by a faint, eerie light. The darkness around her seemed to pulse with every beat of Lena's heart. Suddenly, the woman extended her hand toward Lena, and the shadows seemed to surge forward, reaching out, grasping at Lena's limbs. A scream built in Lena's throat, but it was swallowed by the overwhelming pressure of the air, the suffocating weight of the house pressing in around her. And then, nothing. The shadows receded. The woman's hand fell to her side, and Lena's body, finally able to move, jerked backward. The cold, suffocating grip that had held her seemed to loosen, just for a moment, allowing her to gasp for breath. But as she stumbled backward, her eyes locked on the door at the far end of the hallway, the door that had been closed earlier, but was now wide open. And beyond it, she could see a flicker of light. Faint, but unmistakable. It was coming from a room she hadn't seen before. A room that shouldn't have been there. Lena's instincts screamed at her to run. She needed to escape. But the light. There was something in it that felt like the key to everything. She couldn't explain it, but she knew, deep down, that if she didn't go into that room, she would never understand what was happening. And so, she ran. Her footsteps were unsteady, her body still aching from the tension, but she pushed through it. As she neared the open door, the air around her seemed to shift again, the temperature dropping once more. But this time she didn't stop. The light called to her, urging her forward. Lena stepped inside. The room was small, but its contents took her breath away. It was a study of sorts, but unlike the other rooms in the house, this one was immaculate, untouched by dust or decay. A large, ornate desk stood in the center, covered in books and papers, some open, some stacked neatly. The walls were lined with shelves, filled with strange objects and trinkets, as though the room had been preserved for someone's personal use. But it was the walls that caught her attention. On the walls were dozens of portraits. Each one was of a different person, and each face seemed eerily familiar. Some of them were smiling, others were serious, but all of them shared the same dark eyes. And there, at the center of the room, was the largest portrait of them all. It was of a woman standing alone in front of a house. Her house. The same house Lena had just entered. But the woman in the portrait was not the same as the one who had been following her. This woman had an air of regal authority, her expression cold and calculating. Lena's heart skipped a beat. She knew this woman. She didn't know how, but she did. It was the same woman who had been calling to her. It was the same woman who had whispered her name in the dark. And as Lena took a step closer, her eyes caught something strange in the corner of the portrait. There, at the bottom, almost hidden beneath the woman's feet, was a name. Lena Whittaker. Her breath caught in her throat as the realization hit her. She had never seen this painting before, never heard of this person, but somehow this woman had known her name. The room seemed to close in around her, the air thickening with the weight of 1,000 unseen eyes. The shadows in the corners of the room began to move, swirling as though they were alive, pulling at her, urging her closer to the painting. But Lena knew, deep down, that this was no coincidence. The woman in the portrait had been waiting for her all this time. She reached out a trembling hand to touch the painting, her fingers brushing against the cold surface of the canvas. The moment her skin made contact, a shock of cold ran through her, more intense than before, and the world around her seemed to warp. The walls of the room began to tremble, the bookshelves shaking, the portraits warping as though they were alive, twisting their faces in agony. The house itself seemed to groan, as if waking from a long slumber, and a deep, rumbling voice, low and guttural, reached her ears. "Lena Whittaker, you've come home." The room went black. The darkness enveloped Lena, pulling her deeper into its suffocating void. Her eyes squeezed shut, her senses overwhelmed by the sudden weight of the shadows. Her body trembled as she reached out, but there was nothing to grasp. Just emptiness, stretching endlessly, like she was falling through an abyss of her own fear. The air was thick, and she could feel it pressing against her, smothering her, as though the house itself had taken on a life of its own. A malevolent force that had been watching, waiting for this moment. The voice came again, deep and resonant, echoing in her mind as much as in her ears. "Lena Whittaker, you've come home." The words vibrated through her chest, a deep, primal hum that resonated with her very soul. They weren't just spoken, they were felt, as if the house itself had been calling to her, summoning her here, to this moment, for reasons unknown. Lena's breath hitched, the hairs on the back of her neck standing on end. Her heart pounded so loudly in her ears that she almost didn't hear the soft sound of footsteps, barely audible but unmistakable, approaching from the dark. But she couldn't move, couldn't run. The darkness had her pinned, each step toward her dragging the very air away from her lungs. The voice, now closer, now unmistakable, spoke again, softer this time, like a whisper carried on the wind. "You should never have returned." A cold shiver ran down Lena's spine. She knew, that the voice was not of the woman she had seen, not of the figures she had imagined. It was something far older, far darker, something tied to the very house itself. As the footsteps grew louder, the shadows around her began to distort, swirling like liquid, coiling and undulating in patterns that defied reason. The dark was alive, moving around her, reaching out with cold, invisible hands. She was no longer standing in the room with the portraits. She was somewhere else, somewhere far darker and more dangerous. Then, without warning. The shadows around her suddenly parted. Lena stumbled backward, blinking in confusion. As the darkness lifted, and she found herself standing in a grand hall. The room was immense, far larger than anything the house had shown her before. The walls were lined with tall, arched windows, through which she could barely make out the night sky. Its stars distant and faint, like pinpricks in a vast, suffocating ocean of black. There were no sounds of life here, no comforting hum of nature, or the distant clamor of the town. It was a place suspended in time, cold and silent. But the silence wasn't comforting. It was suffocating. The floor beneath her feet was smooth, cold stone, like marble, but the further her eyes traveled, the more she could see it. The carvings etched into the walls, twisted figures and symbols she didn't recognize, their shapes impossibly alien to her. The air itself was thick with the weight of something ancient, something powerful, something that had been waiting here for far longer than she could comprehend. In the center of the hall, standing alone in a circle of light, was the figure she had been running from. The woman, her form now fully revealed. Her tattered dress clung to her body, her pale skin glowing eerily in the dim light. But it was her eyes that captured Lena's attention. Those eyes, empty, hollow, pierced through her like black holes, threatening to swallow her entire being. "You came back," the woman murmured, her voice softer now, but laced with venom. "You came back, and now you'll never leave. You belong to him. You've always belonged to him." Lena's heart skipped a beat. She couldn't understand what was happening, what had brought her here. But the weight of the woman's words pressed down on her chest like a vice. "You belong to him." The words spun in her mind, repeating, reverberating, until they felt like a truth she couldn't escape. The woman stepped closer, and with each step she took, Lena felt a part of her own soul being pulled from her, dragged away by the force of her presence. "Who is he?" Lena finally gasped, her voice barely above a whisper, her throat tight with fear. The woman's smile twisted, dark and knowing, but she didn't answer immediately. Instead, her cold eyes flickered behind Lena, toward something she could not yet see. It was then that Lena felt it, a presence, something vast, something that filled the room with its weight. It was not the woman who had been following her, not the strange figures from the portraits. This was something far more ancient, something primal. Lena turned slowly, her pulse hammering in her throat. And there, standing at the far end of the hall, illuminated by a shaft of light that seemed to come from nowhere, was a figure. It was tall, too tall. Its form shrouded in darkness, but the faintest outline was visible, like the silhouette of a man who had been carved from the very shadows themselves. Its eyes glowed faintly, green like the light of the moon on a stormy night. There was no face, no features at all. Just those eyes, watching her with an intensity that made her stomach churn, her skin crawl. It was watching her. Before Lena could take another breath, the air around her seemed to crackle with an energy she couldn't comprehend. The presence at the end of the hall moved, slowly, deliberately, and with each step, the temperature in the room plummeted even further, her breath turning to mist before her eyes. The woman beside her stepped back, bowing her head in submission. "He has come for you." Lena took an instinctive step back, her eyes fixed on the figure that now moved toward her. She wanted to scream, to run, but her legs felt heavy, her body frozen in place. The figure loomed closer, its presence filling the hall like a storm, an overwhelming weight that seemed to crush the very air she breathed. Lena Whitaker. The voice was not human. It was deep, guttural, as though it had been formed from the bowels of the earth itself, the sound of the words reverberating in her chest like a great gong. "You..." The voice seemed to tear through the air, shaking the very foundation of the house. Lena's vision blurred, her heart pounding so loudly she could barely hear the words that followed. "You have returned," to your rightful place." The figure stepped closer, and Lena's body finally responded, her feet unwillingly backing away, taking her further into the hall, deeper into the darkness. She didn't understand what was happening, but it was all too real. She could feel it in her bones, in the pit of her stomach. She wasn't alone here. She never had been. She was trapped. The woman who had been following her now stepped forward again, her voice trembling as she spoke. "You have come home, Lena. He has been waiting for so long." Lena's breath caught. "Home," she whispered, barely able to speak. "This is my home." The shadows around her seemed to grow thicker, closer as if they had a will of their own, pulling her toward the figure. But there was no escape, no way out. The woman's words, the house's suffocating grip, the dark presence of whatever stood before her. It was all too much. "You belong to him," the woman said again, her voice softening. "You always have. You always will." And before Lena could fully comprehend what was happening, she felt it. The pull, the terrible tug of something inside her, a dark force that had been lurking beneath the surface, waiting for this moment. And then, the world went black. Lena awoke with a sharp intake of breath, as though she had been drowning, gasping for air in the depths of some unseen abyss. Her chest rose and fell in frantic rhythm, her heart pounding in her throat. She blinked, trying to make sense of where she was, but her surroundings were a blur, a haze of shadows and flickering lights. She was lying on the cold stone floor, the chill biting into her skin. But it wasn't the coldness that made her skin crawl. It was the overwhelming sense that something was in the room with her. Something watching. Her head spun, and as her vision cleared, she realized she was no longer in the grand hall. She was in a different space, a room that seemed even darker, even more suffocating. The walls were made of smooth, dark stone, like a crypt or a tomb, and the air smelled of decay, of something ancient, something forgotten. The faint light that illuminated the room was dim, flickering like the last, dying breath of a candle. Lena sat up, her body trembling, her mind racing to comprehend what had happened. The last thing she remembered was the tall figure. That thing that had spoken her name with such terrifying authority. The voice that had seemed to tear at her very soul. She could still feel its resonance vibrating in her bones, like an echo she couldn't shake. It felt like the world had tilted, as if she had crossed a threshold into something that wasn't just beyond her understanding. It was beyond her world. The room around her was a circular chamber, the stone walls carved with strange symbols, intricate and looping designs that looked almost alive, as though they were pulsating with some malevolent energy. She could hear the faintest sound of something scraping against the stone, a low, skittering noise that made her pulse race. Her eyes darted around, searching the corners, the shadows, for any sign of movement. The air was thick with an unsettling hum, a vibration she could feel deep in her chest, like the room itself was breathing, living, waiting. Her breath hitched as she stood, her legs unsteady, her body weak from the weight of fear that pressed down on her. She staggered to her feet, her hands reaching for the walls for balance, and took a shaky step forward. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but there was nowhere to run. She could feel it, the presence that had been following her since she first stepped into the house. It was here now, inside this room with her. Suddenly, the silence broke. A sound, a faint scraping, like claws against stone, echoed from the far side of the room. Lena froze. Her heart skipped a beat. She didn't want to turn around, didn't want to face whatever was making that sound, but her body moved against her will, her head slowly swiveling toward the noise. It was there, in the shadows, a shape not fully visible, but unmistakable, a figure, hunched low to the ground, its outline indistinct, but unmistakably wrong. It moved, skittering across the stone floor, its limbs long and twisted in ways that shouldn't have been possible. The shadows around it seemed to ripple and bend as it moved, like the darkness itself was warping, bending to its will. Lena's stomach twisted in horror. She wanted to scream, to run, but the figure was already moving closer, its dark, empty eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. The air grew colder, and she felt the oppressive weight of its presence pressing against her, suffocating her. "No," she whispered, her voice trembling. "No." The figure stopped, its head turning slowly to face her, and as it did, Lena saw it, the face, or what remained of a face. It was pale, almost translucent, its skin stretched tight over a skull that was too thin, too distorted. Its mouth opened in a soundless scream, the edges of its lips cracked and peeling. But it wasn't the grotesque visage that sent chills down Lena's spine. It was the eyes. Those eyes, wide and empty, seemed to reach out to her, pulling her in. Lena staggered backward, her heart hammering in her chest. Her legs gave out, and she collapsed to the ground. Her breath was coming in shallow gasps, the cold sweat beading on her forehead. The figure didn't move, but its gaze never left her, as though it were studying her, waiting for her next move. She couldn't take her eyes off of it, unable to look away, as though some invisible force held her in place. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure started to recede back into the shadows. Lena's pulse slowed, but she knew better than to think she was safe. She could still feel its presence, lurking in the darkness, its eyes on her. She was trapped. There was nowhere to hide, nowhere to go. "You cannot hide from him," a voice whispered. Lena's body tensed, her heart leaping into her throat. It wasn't the figure. It wasn't the woman. The voice, soft, low, almost like a breath, came from somewhere inside her mind. And yet, it felt like it was in the very room with her, surrounding her, coming from all directions. "You belong to him." The words sent a shiver down her spine, and suddenly the room grew even darker, the walls closing in, suffocating her. She gasped, trying to breathe, but the air was thick, choking her. She couldn't think, couldn't focus. Everything felt out of control, and her mind spun in a dizzying whirl of confusion and panic. "You don't belong here," the voice continued, now unmistakably clearer. It was deep, malevolent, and it was speaking to her directly. "You were never meant to leave. You were always mine." Lena felt the weight of those words crushing her, sinking into her chest like a stone. She wanted to scream, wanted to fight back, but it was as if the very room itself was feeding on her fear, amplifying it, twisting it into something darker. "No," Lena whispered, her voice trembling with fear. "No, please." The darkness around her seemed to pulse, the air thickening with every breath. The shadows that had once been benign now moved, converging, swirling toward her, closing in like a wave, wrapping her in cold, suffocating darkness. And then, silence. Lena's heart raced as the world around her seemed to shift, as though the very fabric of reality was bending. The shadows parted, revealing a figure standing at the center of the room, bathed in an eerie, unnatural light. The tall, skeletal form was familiar now. That thing, the one that had been watching her from the edges of her mind, the one that had followed her from the moment she stepped foot into the house. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural light, green, like the light of some distant star, and its face was no longer a vague silhouette. It was there, fully realized, its features twisted, its mouth open in a soundless snarl. "You've come to me?" The figure spoke, its voice cold and rasping, like the scraping of metal against stone. "And now you will remain." Lena's mind screamed, her body trembling as she realized what was happening. The house, this place, had been pulling her in all along, weaving its dark influence around her, binding her to it. She had been nothing more than a pawn in its game. But the worst part, the part that sank deep into her soul, was the knowledge that she had always been part of this. From the very beginning. This house, this presence, it had been waiting for her. And now, there would be no escape. The figure took a step forward, and Lena's vision blurred. The air grew thicker, heavier, suffocating her, and then the world turned dark once more. Lena's senses flared back to life with a sudden shock, a sharp gasp that broke through the suffocating darkness. She was no longer lying in the crypt-like chamber. She could feel the cold stone beneath her palms as she pushed herself to a sitting position. Her breath came in jagged bursts, each inhale sharp and painful. Her body ached, as though every bone in her frame had been shattered and then forcibly mended. She wiped her face with trembling hands, her mind a cacophony of racing thoughts. She didn't understand what was happening. Was she still trapped in the house? Was it real, or had it all been a nightmare? The images were so vivid, the sensations so real, that the line between reality and the impossible was beginning to blur. She looked around, eyes darting from shadow to shadow. She was in a new place now, a room that was familiar yet strangely alien. The walls were lined with old wood paneling, dark and worn with age. The furniture was faded, almost forgotten, as though no one had dared to live here in years. Cobwebs hung from the corners of the ceiling, thick with dust, and the air smelled of mildew and decay. The room felt trapped in time, as though it hadn't changed in decades. It was the living room from the house, but it wasn't the same. It felt older. The time-worn furniture, the cracked windows, the dim light filtering through the closed curtains. It was a snapshot of some distant past, preserved but abandoned. Lena's breath caught in her throat when she noticed something at the far end of the room. On the wall, there was a large mirror, but it wasn't like any mirror she had seen before. The glass was dark, smeared with age, and the edges of the frame were ornate, twisted and blackened, like they had been carved from bone. But it wasn't just the mirror that disturbed her. It was the way the glass rippled, as though it wasn't truly glass at all. It shimmered, distorting the light as if it were something far darker, something alive. Her legs felt like they were made of lead as she stood and walked toward the mirror, her eyes transfixed by the eerie, unnatural reflection. As she neared, she saw her own face staring back at her. But it wasn't her face, not completely. The reflection was wrong. Her eyes were darker, deeper, almost black. Her expression was twisted, drained of emotion. Her lips parted in a slight, unsettling grin. It was like a mask, an imitation of herself, but not quite. And behind her, in the glass, she saw something else. A figure standing just behind her. She whipped around, her pulse quickening. There was nothing behind her, nothing but the empty, dust-filled room. But the reflection remained unchanged. The figure was still there, lurking in the shadowy depths of the mirror. Lena took a step back, her breath hitching in her throat. The figure was tall, almost impossibly so, its outline barely visible in the distorted reflection. Its features were obscured by shadows, but there was one thing Lena could see clearly: its eyes. They glowed with an unnatural light, green like the light of distant stars, the same sickly hue she had seen in the being that had followed her, the presence that had been haunting her since her arrival. Lena. The voice was faint, barely audible, but it came from the mirror. It was deep, ancient, and filled with something both comforting and terrifying all at once. The voice seemed to resonate inside her mind, like it was speaking directly to her very soul. "You are home." Her heart stopped. The words, though soft, felt like a hammer to her chest, each syllable reverberating through her, as if they were shattering something deep within her. "Home," she whispered to herself, her voice shaking. It was as though a veil had been lifted. The memories that had been hidden, buried deep beneath layers of fear and confusion, began to surface. The house, the whispers, the things she had seen. They weren't just figments of her imagination. They were real. They were connected to her family. Suddenly, the mirror's surface rippled again, and Lena's reflection blurred. The figure in the background shifted, moving closer. Its outline became clearer now, taller, more menacing, its presence almost suffocating, and its eyes, those glowing eyes, were locked onto her. "It's time you remembered, Lena," the voice murmured. "Time for you to see the truth." Before she could react, the mirror shimmered violently, and a burst of light filled the room, blinding her. She stumbled backward, shielding her eyes from the brightness, and when the light faded, the world around her had changed. She wasn't in the living room anymore. She was back in the grand hall. The very hall where she had first seen the woman, the one who had whispered her name, the one who had called her home. But now, the hall was different. The oppressive darkness that had once filled the space was gone, replaced by a pale, sickly light that emanated from nowhere, casting long shadows across the cracked marble floor. The air was thick with a sense of rightness, like something had clicked into place, something that shouldn't have been revealed. And then she saw it. At the end of the hall, standing in the center of the room, was a pedestal. On it, a large, intricately carved book lay open, its pages yellowed with age. The symbols from the walls of the house, the twisted, ancient ones, were inscribed on the pages, glowing faintly with that same eerie light. Lena's eyes were drawn to the book like a magnet, her feet moving against her will. The closer she got, the stronger the pull became. She reached out for it, her fingers trembling as they hovered over the pages. The words on the pages began to shift, moving as if they were alive, bending, reshaping themselves into words she could understand. "You belong to the House of Shadows. You are bound to it by blood. The house is your home. The master is your master." Her breath hitched in her throat. The words seemed to echo through her mind, filling the empty space inside her like 1,000 whispers, each one more insistent than the last. "No." Lena gasped, her voice trembling. "No. I don't belong here. This isn't my home." The book's pages flipped to the next, and Lena's eyes widened as the words burned into her mind. "You have always been a part of this place. Your blood is bound to the house. You were brought here to serve the master. And now, he calls for you." The room seemed to shift again, the walls distorting, bending inward. Lena could feel it, the pull of the house, drawing her closer to the pedestal, closer to the book. Her mind screamed, but her body didn't respond. It felt like her will was slipping away, like the house was slowly taking control, pulling her into its suffocating grasp. And then, before she could stop it, a shadow moved across the floor, slithering toward her. It rose, taking form, its shape becoming more distinct with each passing second. It was the figure from the mirror, the tall, skeletal form, its glowing eyes locked onto hers. "You are mine now, Lena," the voice said again, cold and resonant. "You always have been." Lena stumbled backward, her hands shaking as she tried to pull away, but the shadow was closing in. The walls pressed in tighter, the air thickening around her, and then she heard a voice, faint but familiar, a whisper, soft and comforting. "Lena." She froze. It was the same voice from the mirror, but this time it wasn't the figure speaking. It wasn't the house. It was someone else, someone she hadn't heard in years. Her heart raced, her eyes scanning the room. She knew that voice. "Mom," she whispered, almost afraid to say the name. The shadow paused. "Mom." The voice came again, clearer this time. "It's time, Lena. Time for you to come home." Lena's breath caught in her throat as the world around her seemed to distort and tremble. The shadow in front of her wavering like smoke caught in the wind. The voice, the faint whisper she had just heard. Was it her mother? It had sounded so real, so familiar. Her heart pounded louder now, thumping in her chest as if it might break free from her ribs. "Mum," Lena whispered again, her voice shaking, the words barely leaving her lips. She had to be imagining it. This house, this place, it had already twisted her mind once before. But the voice, it felt like something from her past, something real, something human. It had been so long since she'd heard it, so long since. Her mind raced, memories flooding her. She hadn't thought about her mother in years. The pain of her absence had been buried deep within her, tucked away and sealed in a box she dared not open. But now, with that faint whisper in her ears, all those forgotten fragments of her past were rushing back. The house, the strange coldness, the presence that had been stalking her since her arrival. It all seemed to be connected to something much darker, something she had repressed, something her mind refused to understand. The shadow before her shifted again, its form becoming more defined, its outline sharper, its eyes glowing brighter like two lanterns in the dark. She wanted to scream, to run, but the shadow's presence seemed to freeze her, pinning her in place. She could feel the oppressive weight of it bearing down on her, an unseen hand around her throat, tightening with every passing second. Lena, the whisper again. But it wasn't just a whisper. The voice was clearer now, stronger, as though it was reaching out to her across the chasm of time. Lena, it's time. She couldn't think. She couldn't breathe. The walls were closing in on her, the air growing heavy and thick with an unbearable pressure. The shadow in front of her loomed larger, its twisted form almost filling the entire room. And then its voice came again, a deep, rumbling sound that seemed to echo from the very depths of the earth. You are mine now, Lena. You always have been. You can't escape. Not from me. Not from him. A flash of light, a sudden brightness that burned into her retinas, blinding her for a split second. And then the voice changed. It was her mother's voice. Lena, I'm here. I've always been here. You never left. Come home. Her knees buckled beneath her, and she fell to the cold stone floor with a thud. The room around her spun. Her hands gripped the floor, her palms slick with sweat, her breath coming in shallow gasps. Her head ached, the pressure building as if her skull might split open. She wanted to curl into herself, to shut out the sounds, to close her ears to the voice that haunted her. But she couldn't. She couldn't escape it. It was too real, too tangible. The voice, her mother's voice, was so full of sorrow, of something deeper, something ancient. The house itself seemed to hum with the weight of it, reverberating through the walls and the very stones beneath her. The shadows, the presence, the figure that had followed her. It was all one thing, one being, one presence that had been here for so long, waiting for her. Lena squeezed her eyes shut, the darkness behind her eyelids swarming with visions, flashes of memories she had locked away for years. Her mother's face, pale and thin, eyes full of something Lena couldn't place. Her voice, soft but insistent, telling her stories of the house. Stories of how it had always been a part of their family, stories of how it had called to them. Lena's mind spun in a whirlpool of confusion. Her mother had always warned her about this place, about the house. But why had she ignored her? Why had she come back? It wasn't just the house. It was her. It was the family that had always been tied to this cursed place. Her blood ran through these walls. The shadows seemed to laugh, the figure in front of her moving closer, almost too fast to see. It was right there now. Just in front of her, the overwhelming presence pressing against her chest, as though it were trying to take root inside her. The glow in its eyes intensified, searing almost like a beacon, pulling her in. You belong here, Lena, it growled, its voice mixing with her mother's, twisting into something unholy. You have always belonged here. This house has always been your home. Your blood was meant to serve, to stay. The words wrapped around her, squeezing the air from her lungs. She couldn't think. She couldn't move. She was trapped. The room felt like it was caving in around her, the walls bending, the ceiling pressing down. Her vision blurred, and her mind reeled, spiraling out of control. The memories, the voices, the shadow, they were all one now, suffocating her. She could feel the weight of them. The endless press of something ancient, something terrible, slowly crushing her spirit. She gasped for air, but it felt like she was drowning. The darkness wrapping around her like chains, pulling her deeper, further into the depths. "Let me in, Lena." The voice echoed in her mind. She heard it, felt it, deep inside her. It wasn't just the shadow. It wasn't just her mother. It was the house itself, reaching into her, claiming her, pulling her into its blackened core. Her head snapped back, and in that instant, she saw it, the truth, finally revealed to her, like a shard of ice slicing through the fog of her memories. The house, the shadows, the figure, the whispers. It had all been waiting for her to remember. Her mother had brought her here once, long ago. The house was theirs. It had always been a part of their family, part of their bloodline. Her mother had always known the house's true nature, but she had hidden it from Lena, kept it buried so deep that Lena couldn't see it until now. The house didn't just call to them, it claimed them. And now, with Lena's return, it was ready to take her completely. Lena gasped for breath, trying to steady herself as the house seemed to shift around her, growing tighter, darker. She could feel the walls pressing in, the weight of history, of her past, crushing down on her. The shadow before her grew darker, its form more distinct, and then it spoke again. "You cannot run from what is already inside you." It moved closer, its presence filling the room, suffocating her. The light in its eyes flared, and Lena felt someone, reach out to her from the depths of her mind. Her own memories, twisted, warped, broken. It was the house. It was her blood. She had always been a part of it. And now it was calling her home. Lena couldn't breathe. She couldn't think. She was nothing now, nothing but the house's whisper, the echo of her own past. The darkness that had claimed her before she even knew it had begun. And in that final moment, she knew, deep down, there was no escaping. Lena's world crumbled around her, the floor beneath her feet shifting like liquid, the walls of the house pressing in with an oppressive weight. She was suffocating, not from the air, but from the pull of the house itself. It was a living thing, hungry and relentless, and it had been waiting for her for far too long. It knew her, it owned her, and now there was nowhere to hide. The shadow before her, that terrible presence, took another step forward. The faint green glow of its eyes burned into her very soul. She could feel it. Every inch of her skin prickled with the realization. It wasn't just following her. It was inside her, in the deepest part of her being, growing stronger with every breath she took. The house, the shadows, the memory, it was all connected to her. She had always been a part of it. She just hadn't known until now. "You can't run, Lena," the voice echoed, dark and heavy, surrounding her like a blanket of ice. "You never could." Lena's pulse raced as the figure's silhouette loomed larger. She wanted to scream, but the scream was stuck in her throat, strangled by the suffocating presence of the house. Her feet refused to move, her body locked in place, unable to escape. Her mind was in turmoil, caught between terror and an overwhelming sense of déjà vu. Everything felt familiar, yet all she wanted to do was run, to get away from this nightmare. But there was no escape. The shadows seemed to swirl around her, gathering like a storm, pushing her into the center of the room. The very air around her crackled with energy, with ancient power. The walls whispered, their voices muffled, yet unmistakably clear in the depths of her mind. "You belong here, Lena," the voice continued, each word wrapped in an insidious calmness. "It's in your blood. You always have. You always will." She felt something inside her snap, as if the weight of these words, these memories, had finally reached the breaking point. Her mind raced, trying to piece together what was happening, but it was impossible. The darkness had consumed everything. The house was no longer just a structure. It was a force, a being of its own. And now, it was pulling her deeper, pulling her into its heart where she was always meant to be. She closed her eyes, trying to block it out, but the vision of her mother, the The face she had buried so many years ago flashed before her mind's eye. The woman had always known. She had always known what the house was, what it did. Her mother had been the keeper of the house, the one who had been chosen to carry its burden. She had brought Lena into this world, into this place, and now it was her turn to bear the weight. Lena's chest tightened. The house hadn't just called to her. It had claimed her from the moment she was born. She was the next in line. The heir to the darkness that had haunted this place for centuries. The shadows in front of her moved, swirling like a storm, and then the figure before her stepped forward, its glowing eyes locking onto hers. "It's time," the voice said, low and deep, like the rumble of thunder. "You've always known it would be." Lena couldn't fight it anymore. She didn't want to fight it. The truth was clear now. This house, this place had always been her home. It was where she belonged. The weight of the past, the whispers in the dark, the memories of things she had long forgotten, all came flooding back in a rush of realization. She was chosen, not by her mother, but by the house itself. And there was no turning back. With a slow, almost reluctant movement, the shadow reached out, its hand stretching toward her. The air around her grew colder, the very temperature of the room dropping to a bone-chilling level. Lena could feel the darkness wrapping around her, suffocating her, taking root in her soul. The hand hovered inches from her face, and she could see the ghostly outline of the figure, its features now more defined. A tall, gaunt creature, its face a twisted mask of emptiness. But there was something else in those eyes. Something familiar. It wasn't just a monster. It was her. Or, at least, it was what she had become. The house had taken her, molded her into this thing, this presence that had always been meant to be. It wasn't just a figure. It was her destiny. The hand touched her skin, and in that instant, Lena felt everything. Every whisper, every flicker of memory, flood back. Her mother, her childhood, the house. The feeling of being trapped. She had always known it was coming. She had always known this day would come. Her body trembled as the figure's hand brushed against her, cold and hard. And then she felt it. The connection. The bloodline. The dark, invisible thread that had always bound her to this place. It wasn't just the house that claimed her. It was the master of the house. The true master. The figure's eyes widened, and for a brief moment, Lena thought she saw something else there. Something human, something sad, something broken. But then it was gone. With a violent shudder, the figure withdrew its hand, and the entire room seemed to tremble. The walls groaned, as if the house itself were awakening from a long slumber. The shadows stretched out around her, growing, twisting, until they enveloped the entire room. And then, as quickly as it had all begun, the room fell silent. Lena stood there, her body cold, her chest tight, and for the first time, she didn't feel the pull of fear. She felt acceptance. She had been chosen, just as her mother had been chosen before her. The house was her home. It was always going to be. "You are bound to me now," the voice whispered, "bound to this place, to this family, to him." The words settled over her like a shroud, and for a moment, she stood still, her eyes fixed on the emptiness in front of her. And then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, she smiled. A small, sad smile that carried with it a strange sense of release. The chains that had held her all her life, chains she hadn't even known existed, were finally gone. She was home. And the house had claimed her. The silence in the room stretched endlessly, the air thick with the weight of centuries, pressing down on Lena like the house itself was inhaling and exhaling in rhythm with her breath. The shadows that had once seemed so oppressive now felt strangely comforting, like old friends. They wrapped around her, whispering in a language she couldn't quite understand. Words that made sense only to the house and the dark thing that had watched over it for as long as time had existed. The figure, the thing that had once haunted her every waking moment, had dissolved into the darkness. But even as it vanished, Lena could feel it. Feel its presence still pressing against her, not a physical form, but something more subtle, more insidious. She could feel the weight of it deep inside her chest, a part of her now, as much a part of her as the house had always been. Her vision swam. Her head pounded with the intensity of the revelations. Her mother's voice still echoed in her mind, like a broken record spinning in a darkened room. "It's time, Lena." Her legs felt weak, and she stumbled forward, barely catching herself on the cold stone wall. She closed her eyes, trying to steady her breathing, trying to clear her mind, but the thoughts were relentless. Memories she hadn't known existed pressed in on her from all sides, flooding her mind, pushing her toward an inevitable realization. She was not free. She was never meant to be free. She had always been a part of this place, this family, and now the house had claimed her completely. Lena turned and looked around the room, the emptiness swallowing her. The walls seemed to close in, the once familiar room now feeling alien and alienating. But it was still the same. It had always been the same. This room, this place, had been the heart of it all, the center from which everything had begun, and everything had always returned. Her mother's voice echoed again, softer this time, a sad, broken whisper. "You've always known the truth, Lena. You belong here. You always have." Lena's mind raced. She tried to push the thoughts away, tried to run from them, but they followed her. She had been born to this house. She had been born to be its servant, to be its heir, its chosen one, the one to bear the darkness and the weight that it required. Her mother had known it, and now, so did Lena. The chains that had bound her, that had twisted her existence into something she could barely comprehend, were finally being revealed to her. The house was more than a home. It was a living thing, ancient and powerful, and it fed on the souls of those who entered it. And Lena had been its most recent victim, its newest offering. Lena's legs carried her across the room, drawn inexplicably to the center, where the floor seemed to breathe beneath her. She stood in the middle of the room and looked around, her eyes scanning the darkness that hung thick in the corners. There was a coldness in the air, an oppressive weight that only grew as she stood there, as though the very walls were closing in, wanting to swallow her whole. Her eyes fell upon something she hadn't noticed before. A large, ornate chair sat at the far end of the room, raised on a pedestal like a throne. It was made of dark wood, its arms and legs twisted into strange, unsettling shapes that seemed almost alive, like the chair had been carved from the bones of some long, dead creature. The back of the chair was high, curved in a way that made it look like a crown of thorns. At the foot of the pedestal, strange markings had been carved into the floor, a circle that was both intricate and disturbing. It seemed almost to pulse with a life of its own, glowing faintly in the dim light. Lena felt a pull toward it, a magnetic force that she could not resist. She stumbled forward, her mind in a haze. This was it. This was what the house wanted, what it had always wanted from her. As she stepped closer to the throne, the shadows around her seemed to shift, to stretch and writhe as though the room itself were alive. She could feel the weight of the eyes of the house upon her, watching, waiting. It was as if every step she took had been predestined, each movement guided by forces beyond her comprehension. She couldn't stop it. She didn't even want to. She reached the throne and stood before it, her hand trembling as she reached out and touched the cold, polished wood. Her fingers brushed against the intricate carvings, the smoothness of the surface, like the skin of some ancient beast. The chair seemed to breathe beneath her touch, as though it had been waiting for her to claim it. Lena felt a strange sensation in her chest, a pull, a deep and ancient desire to sit, to claim the throne as her own. And in that moment, she realized the truth. She had always been meant to sit here. The throne, the house, the power. It had been calling to her, waiting for her to accept it. She took a slow, deliberate step forward, and as her body lowered into the chair, the room around her seemed to change. The air grew colder, the shadows darker, the hum of energy growing stronger, more alive. It was as though the house itself had been waiting for this moment, this act of submission, to crown her as its queen. As Lena settled into the chair, a deep rumbling sound filled the room, like a distant growl from the bowels of the earth. The air around her seemed to thicken, and she could feel the presence of something ancient and powerful moving through her, filling every fiber of her being. The house had claimed her. Her body trembled, not from fear but from the overwhelming power that was now coursing through her veins. She could feel it. The house was inside her. The shadows, the whispers, the voices, they were all a part of her now, as much a part of her as her heartbeat. The house had consumed her, had made her its vessel, its heir. Lena's mind swirled with the weight of the truth. She was not just a part of the house. She was the house. She was the master of it now, and everything that had come before. Her mother, her family, the house's twisted legacy, was now hers to carry. And yet, something inside her resisted. There was a flicker of doubt, a tiny ember of something human that refused to be consumed. She had always been told that she was meant for this, that she had been born to rule, to inherit the darkness. But now that she was here, sitting in the throne of the house, she felt a strange emptiness, a hollow feeling deep inside her. Was this really what she had wanted? Was this the life she had been destined for? The shadows swirled, gathering around her like a storm, and for a brief moment, she heard it again, the whisper, the voice of her mother. Lena, it called softly like a distant dream. Lena closed her eyes, feeling the weight of it all. The throne was no longer just a chair, it was a prison. A crown of shadows meant to bind her, to keep her tied to the house forever. She was its queen, but she was also its prisoner. I am home, Lena whispered to herself, her voice trembling. And yet, in the depths of her soul, she could still feel the flicker of something else. A choice, a way out. But was it too late to escape? Lena's heart pounded in her chest, the rhythmic beat echoing in her ears like the footsteps of something approaching. The shadows that surrounded her, thick and suffocating, seemed to pulse in time with her breath. Her body still trembled, the weight of her new reality pressing down on her, suffocating her will to fight. She was the queen of this place now. The house had claimed her, and yet, in the depths of her heart, a question still remained. Was it too late to turn back? The throne, once an object of power, now felt more like a prison. The seat beneath her was cold, unyielding, and the shadows wrapped around her in an unrelenting grip, pulling her deeper into the heart of the house. She could feel its presence, its weight pressing on her from every direction, filling her every thought with its ancient hunger. It had consumed her. And yet, there was something inside her, her human self, that refused to yield completely to its darkness. As she sat there, the weight of her position beginning to settle in, Lena's mind raced. She couldn't help but wonder if this was how her mother had felt. Had her mother once sat on this very throne, feeling the same emptiness, the same cold hunger that seemed to consume everything in its path? Had her mother known that there was no escape? Lena looked around the room, her eyes scanning the dim, shifting shadows that filled the space. The air felt thick with anticipation, as though the house itself were waiting for her to make the next move. The whispers had returned, low and indistinct, like the murmurs of 1,000 souls trapped within the walls of the house, each one desperate to be heard. The floor beneath her creaked, and for a brief moment, she thought she felt something shift, something moving just beyond the edge of her vision. But when she turned to look, the space was empty. Her mind was playing tricks on her. She could feel it, the fear, the anxiety, the growing sense of dread. Her fingers dug into the armrests of the throne, the carved wood digging into her palms. She closed her eyes, trying to center herself, to shut out the swirling thoughts that threatened to overwhelm her. But then, a voice, clear and unmistakable, cut through the darkness. "You are mine." Lena's eyes snapped open. The words weren't a whisper anymore. They were louder, stronger, filled with an undeniable presence. She could feel them in her bones, shaking her very core. The throne shuddered beneath her, and she looked down, her heart racing. The carvings on the armrests, those dark, twisted shapes, seemed to wreathe, shifting and moving as though the wood itself was alive. The shadows around her grew darker, thicker, pressing in from every side. The room seemed to grow smaller, suffocating her as the weight of the house bore down on her. "No," Lena whispered, her breath shaky. "This isn't me. I don't belong here." But the shadows didn't listen. They closed in, and the house responded with an audible groan, like a living thing stretching, yawning, as if it had finally awoken from a long, unbroken sleep. The throne beneath her shook again, this time more violently, as if the house itself were trying to push her into submission. Lena's hands shot out, grasping for anything to hold on to. The room spun around her, and she felt the ground beneath her feet buckle and twist. She stood up, her legs unsteady, her mind a whirl of confusion and fear. She was still in the center of the room, but now the walls seemed to close in even tighter, the shadows shifting like fingers reaching for her. "You will never leave," the voice echoed, its power wrapping around her like chains. The voice was everywhere, inside her mind, in the very walls, in the ground beneath her feet. "You belong to me." Lena staggered backward, her mind reeling. The force of the words pushed her against the wall, and she felt herself slide down to the cold stone floor. Her breath came in short, sharp gasps as she fought to maintain her sanity, to cling to whatever fragments of herself had survived this long. But the house wasn't done with her. The shadows were everywhere now, swirling around her, pulling at her limbs, tugging at her spirit. She could feel herself being dragged deeper, further into its embrace. She had always known the truth. Her family had always known. This house, the House of Shadows, was more than just a structure. It was alive, it was old, and it was hungry. It had fed on generations, and now it was feeding on her. And then, as though answering her thoughts, the shadows around her seemed to twist and writhe into a new shape. A figure began to emerge from the darkness. Lena's breath hitched. Her eyes widened in disbelief. Standing before her was a figure, familiar yet utterly wrong. It was a reflection of herself. The same face, the same eyes, but there was something in the eyes, something different, darker, deeper. The face in the shadow was a perfect mirror, but it wasn't her. It was a twisted version of her, a distorted reflection of what she had become. Lena's throat tightened, and she wanted to scream, but the words wouldn't come. The reflection stepped forward, its movements slow and deliberate, its eyes never leaving hers. "You have come to claim what was always yours," the shadowed reflection said, its voice the same as her own but twisted, distorted, filled with something ancient and wrong. "You are the heir to this place. You always have been." Lena's heart pounded in her chest. She reached out, as if to touch the reflection, but the moment her fingers brushed against the air, the reflection's eyes flashed with a sickly green light. She recoiled, but the darkness closed in around her, wrapping her in its suffocating grip. "This is your fate, Lena." The reflection continued, its voice low and insistent. "You cannot escape. You were born for this. This house is your home, your throne. You are mine." The last of her resistance shattered. She had always known. She had always belonged here. The house had been calling her since the day she was born. It had claimed her the moment she set foot inside. But deep within her, something flickered. A spark of defiance. She stood tall, her breath steadying, the weight of the throne, of her past, pressing against her chest. The shadows around her continued to twist, but she could feel them shifting. The figure before her, the reflection, wavered. Her eyes narrowed, her lips pressing into a thin line. She wasn't done. Not yet. Lena raised her hand, and for the first time since sitting on the throne, she felt something break free inside her. Her own will. The shadows recoiled, the room trembling as she pushed against them. The house groaned, its foundations shifting, but Lena's voice rose, commanding, resolute. No, not anymore. The reflection's eyes flickered, its form wavering, and with one final, forceful motion, Lena stepped forward, her hands outstretched, and she tore the darkness apart. The room screamed in protest, the walls cracking, the shadows shattering as the light pushed back the dark. She was no longer just the house's heir. She was its master. The crackle of energy in the air surged through Lena's body, burning with intensity. The darkness that had once suffocated her, that had once pressed upon her chest like a heavy weight, began to fade, retreating from her like a tide that had run its course. The air was thick with the sound of cracking wood. A low rumble beneath her feet as the very foundation of the house seemed to tremble. Lena stood, her breath steady, her hands still raised, her power rippling outward. She felt it. The weight of the house that had once claimed her, now relinquishing its hold. She was no longer simply the heir to its darkness. She was something more now, something stronger. Her pulse thrummed with the energy of the house itself, its ancient, oppressive power now flowing through her like blood in her veins. But this time, it wasn't suffocating her. This time, it was hers. And as the walls groaned in response, as the floor shifted beneath her, she knew that the balance had changed. The house had not broken her. It had given her the strength she needed to control it, to become one with it. Lena's fingers twitched, and with a sudden burst of force, the shadows around her parted. The darkened room, once heavy and suffocating, now seemed alive with a different energy, an energy that she commanded. She could feel the house, feel its pulse beneath her feet, feel it breathe. It was no longer an adversary. It was a part of her now. The throne, the symbol of her imprisonment, no longer held any sway over her. It had been the place where the house had tried to bind her, to claim her, to make her one with its darkness. But now, she saw it for what it truly was, a remnant of the past, a relic of the house's ancient will. She had outgrown it. Lena turned away from the throne, stepping forward into the center of the room. The shadows followed her, now not as a prison, but as her servants. They swirled around her like living tendrils of night, answering to her every command. And as she moved, the house responded, shifting and creaking, its form bending to her will. I am the house now, Lena murmured to herself, her voice low and filled with a strange calmness. She could feel the weight of the words, the power they carried. And as she spoke them, she could feel them becoming a truth. The house, the shadows, the endless corridors that had once trapped her were no longer barriers. They were hers to command, hers to shape. But as Lena basked in the realization of her newfound power, a voice, familiar and dark, slithered through her thoughts. You cannot escape your nature, Lena? Her heart stopped. The voice was a memory, a whisper from the depths of the house, but it was not a part of her own thoughts. It was the master's voice. Lena's hands clenched into fists. She could feel it now. The deep, resounding power that had always been there, the force that had shaped this house and everything within it. It was him, the one who had built this place, the one who had established the rule of the house, the one who had always been its true master. Her eyes darkened. She could feel the pull of his influence, his shadow stretching across the house. But now, she was not just the heir to this place. She was the true heir, the master. Lena stood tall, her eyes blazing with resolve, and she spoke the words that would forever change the fate of the house. I am the master now, she declared, her voice ringing out like a bell. filled with certainty. You will bow to me, or you will fade into nothing. A gust of wind swept through the room, the shadows swirling around her as the walls seemed to shudder. The house was alive with her power, but somewhere deep within its heart, a presence stirred. The voice answered, cold and resonant, like a distant thunderclap. You think you have claimed me, but you do not understand. You are still my creation, Lena. You have always been my creation. You will never be free. Lena's breath came in short, sharp bursts. The truth settled over her like a shroud. The master, the one who had shaped her, who had molded the house, had never truly relinquished control. He had never fully let go. The house, for all her power, still belonged to him. But the chains that had once bound her, the chains of her bloodline and her past, were now shattered. And though the master's influence lingered, it was nothing compared to the strength she now held. She had always been the house's heir, but now she was its ruler. Lena raised her hands, her fingers curling into a fist as she channeled the power of the house through her. The walls groaned again, but this time the sound was different. It was no longer the sound of submission. It was the sound of rebellion. The house, now under her control, pushed back, its ancient structure creaking as it fought against the force she had unleashed. But Lena did not falter. She was the house now. It was a part of her, as much as she was a part of it. The shadows that had once been her prison were now her allies. The walls that had once confined her were now her domain. You have no power over me, Lena said through gritted teeth, her voice echoing in the vast emptiness of the house. I am the master now. You will bow to me. The presence of the master faltered, a brief hesitation rippling through the air. For the first time in the history of the house, the shadows shifted, fighting against the control of their creator, and Lena felt it. The power of the house surged beneath her. The foundation of everything that had come before her buckling beneath the weight of her resolve. But the battle was not over. The voice of the master, though weakened, echoed again, this time softer, more insidious. You are not free, Lena. You cannot escape your destiny. You were born to serve me. To serve the house. Lena's eyes narrowed. She felt the pulse of the house beneath her feet, and for the first time, she felt the full extent of the control she wielded. She was not its prisoner anymore. She was its queen. I am the master, she repeated, her voice ringing with the finality of her words. And I will not be controlled. Not by you. Not by anyone. With a fierce cry, Lena raised both hands toward the ceiling. The shadows responded, swarming around her like a living storm, twisting, turning, converging into a single, massive shape. The house groaned as it was reshaped, the ancient energy that had once bound it now flowing freely into her hands. Lena's body hummed with power as she forced the house to bend to her will. And then, with a final surge of energy, she felt it. The power of the house, the full weight of its ancient, endless hunger surging through her. She was the master now. The house belonged to her. The walls shook, the shadows howled, and the house seemed to scream as its heart was torn open, reshaped, remade. The master's presence was gone, and Lena, now the true ruler of the house, stood alone, her heart filled with a dark triumph. Lena stood motionless in the center of the room, her eyes fixed on the shifting shadows that danced around her. The air was thick with power, the pulse of the house now reverberating through her veins like a living current. She could feel it, the endless hum of energy that had once been a weight, a burden, now flowing freely through her. She had broken the chains that bound her. She had claimed the house, but in doing so, she knew that her journey was only beginning. The master, the one who had created this place, was gone. But his absence left an emptiness that Lena could feel deep in her chest, an echo of something larger, something darker, that still lingered. The house was hers, yes, but the power that had been passed down through generations was not something easily controlled. It was ancient. It was hungry. And it had its own will. For a long moment, the house was silent. The walls, once alive with the constant hum of whispers and creaks, were still. The shadows that had obeyed her command swirled gently around her, as if waiting for her next move. They were her shadows now, but they were no longer the only force at work within the house. She could feel the faint pull of the old magic that had been here long before her, a force tied to the house's very foundation. The walls seemed to breathe. "It is not over yet," Lena whispered to herself, her voice barely audible in the heavy silence. But even as she spoke, she felt the faintest flicker of doubt. The house, her house, was alive, yes. But was she truly its master? Or was she still just a player in a much larger game? A game that had been set in motion long before her birth. She closed her eyes, trying to center herself, to tap into the deep well of power she now commanded. And when she did, she felt it. A whisper, so faint it was barely more than a breath, brushed against her mind. Not yet. Her pulse quickened. She reached out with her senses, expanding her awareness throughout the house, feeling its every corner, every crevice, every heartbeat. The shadows that danced around her seemed to flicker in response, the very air thickening with the weight of the house's awareness. Then she heard it again. A low, distant rumble, almost like a growl. It came from somewhere deep within the house, from the heart of it. She turned toward the source, her body tense with anticipation. It was as though the house were calling to her, urging her to come deeper, to explore the parts of it that she had never known. Lena's eyes narrowed. She could feel the weight of its presence now, pulling her forward, pulling her into the darkness beneath the house. Without thinking, she began to move. The floorboards creaked under her feet as she walked, the shadows following her every step, their presence surrounding her, a constant companion. The house seemed to stretch before her, the walls distorting, bending as though it were shifting to guide her. The deeper she went, the colder it became, the air thick with an unsettling stillness. The hallway seemed to stretch on forever, winding down into darkness. Each step she took felt heavier, like she was descending into the very bowels of the house, into its hidden heart. The farther she went, the more she felt the presence of something ancient, something that had been buried here, forgotten by time. She reached the end of the hall. The door at the end was different from the others. It was made of dark, weathered wood, its surface etched with strange symbols that seemed to pulse with a faint glow. It was a door that had been untouched for years, sealed away from the rest of the house. Lena reached for the door handle, her fingers brushing against the cold metal. The moment she touched it, the air around her seemed to crackle with energy, the shadows swirling around her like a storm. A low hum filled the room, growing louder, vibrating through her chest, as if the house itself were alive and breathing. With a deep breath, Lena pushed open the door. The room beyond was dark, almost suffocatingly so, but she could feel the power radiating from it. The air felt thick with ancient energy. The shadows inside swirling in patterns she didn't understand. But there was something else. A presence. Something in the room watching her, waiting. Lena stepped inside. The room was vast, the ceiling lost in shadows, and the floor beneath her feet seemed to ripple, like the ground itself was moving. At the center of the room was a large stone altar, cracked and weathered by time, its surface covered in ancient runes. It was surrounded by a circle of faded symbols worn into the stone. This was the heart of the house, she realized, the place where the power had first been summoned, where the house had been born. She could feel it now. The power. It was pulsing beneath the floor, like the heartbeat of the house itself. This room, this place, was its soul. And then she saw it, a figure, standing in the shadows at the far end of the room. It was tall, its features cloaked in darkness, but there was no mistaking the figure. It was him, the master, the one who had built the house, who had created everything that had come before. Lena's pulse raced. Her hand instinctively went to her side, where she could still feel the lingering echo of his power. The house had rejected him, had cast him aside, but his presence still lingered, a dark shadow that had not yet been fully eradicated. The figure in the shadows did not move, but its eyes, those glowing green eyes, were fixed on her. "You are not the master here," it said, its voice deep, echoing through the room, reverberating in her very bones. Lena stood tall, the power of the house swirling around her, the shadows at her command. She was no longer afraid. The house was hers. It had claimed her, and now she would claim it. "I am the master," Lena replied, her voice calm, unwavering. "And you are no longer needed." The figure's eyes flashed brighter for a moment, and Lena could feel it. The challenge, the power that had once controlled the house, still fighting against her. But it was weak, like a fading flame, flickering out as she drew in the power of the house, binding it to herself. "You think you can control me?" the figure hissed, its voice now tinged with desperation. "You are nothing without me. Without my power, you will fade into nothing." Lena shook her head, her fingers curling into a fist. She could feel the house trembling beneath her feet, responding to her command. She wasn't the same as before. She wasn't the helpless hare who had been trapped by the past. She was its master. She was its queen. "You no longer have power here," Lena said, her voice ringing with finality. With a flick of her wrist, the shadows surged forward, the figure's form warping and distorting as the darkness consumed it. The green glow in its eyes flickered, dimming as the last remnants of the master's presence were swallowed by the house. Lena stood in the center of the room, her breath steady, her eyes glowing faintly as the shadows receded. The house was silent now, its heartbeat calm, its energy flowing through her. She had claimed it. She was its ruler, and nothing, not even the echoes of the past, could take that from her. The house fell into an eerie, unnerving silence. It was as if the very air had been sucked from the room, leaving nothing but a vacuum. Lena stood in the heart of the darkness, her heart pounding with the aftershock of what she had just done. The power, the raw, ancient force of the house, still thrummed in her veins, like a hum beneath her skin. She could feel it. The house was hers now. It had been claimed, not by force, but by will, her will. The figure of the master, the one who had once held dominion over this place, who had forged its heart and fed its hunger, was gone. The shadows had swallowed him whole, as if the very essence of the house had consumed its creator, erasing the last trace of his influence from its foundation. But even as the master's presence faded, Lena knew this was not the end. The house may have been hers, but there was more to it than she could understand, more secrets buried deep within its walls. As much as she had claimed control, as much as she had shattered the chains that had once bound her, she knew that the house would always have more to reveal. The house had always had a way of keeping its secrets, and the deeper she delved into it, the more she realized there was a hidden legacy to its power, a legacy tied to her very bloodline. Lena's eyes shifted toward the stone altar at the center of the room. The ancient runes that lined its surface pulsed faintly, a low glow that seemed to beckon her. The altar had always been the heart of the house, the source of its power, its lifeblood. It had been the center of everything, where the rituals had begun, where the first whispers of darkness had taken root, where the pact had been sealed. And now, it was hers to command. She walked toward it slowly, feeling the weight of history in every step. The shadows followed her as always, but now they moved in harmony with her, not as prisoners but as servants. She could feel them, waiting, ready to obey her every command. They were a part of her now. When she reached the altar, she extended her hand and placed it gently on the stone surface. The runes glowed brighter, reacting to her touch, as if the house were recognizing her. She closed her eyes and let the power flow through her, feeling the energy of the altar, the pulse of the house itself, beating in time with her own heartbeat. The world around her shifted. The room began to fade, and for a moment, it felt as though the house was shifting into something else, into a place beyond time, beyond reality. She was pulled deeper into the house's essence, the ancient power that had been the source of its hunger, its darkness, flowing through her like blood. Images flashed in her mind, visions of the past, of her ancestors, of the first family to inhabit the house. She saw them, standing in this very room. Their faces twisted with the same hunger, the same ambition that had gripped her. They had built this house, shaped it, bound it with blood and ritual, creating something that would live beyond them, beyond the years. It was more than just a house. It was a legacy of darkness, a legacy that had always belonged to her family. Lena gasped, breaking free from the vision. The house was speaking to her, showing her the past, the twisted history that had bound her bloodline to this place. She understood now. She wasn't just the heir to this house. She was the continuation of it, the next chapter in its long and twisted legacy. She had been born to rule it, just as those before her had, but something shifted in her as she realized the full weight of her inheritance. The house's power was hers to command, but it had always been bound to darkness. Her family had always been tied to it, tied to its hunger, to its insatiable thirst for souls. She had always known that there was something wrong with the house, something dark lurking beneath its surface. But now, as she felt the full force of its power surge through her, she understood what that darkness truly was. The house wasn't just a structure. It wasn't just a place. It was alive, and it fed on those who inhabited it. It had always fed on them. Her ancestors had fed it. And now, it was her turn. But the question lingered in the back of her mind. Could she control it? Could she ever truly break free of the legacy that had bound her to this place, or was she destined to become like those before her? Lena closed her eyes, pushing the doubt aside. She was no longer a servant to the house. She had claimed it, made it her own. She was its queen. And no one, not even the darkness that lived within its walls, would take that from her. She took a deep breath and stepped away from the altar. The shadows followed her, their presence a constant, soothing hum in the air. She could feel their power, their hunger, but now it was her power, her hunger. She could feel the house. She could feel it breathe. And it had stopped being a prison. Lena turned and began to walk toward the exit of the room, her steps sure and steady. The house was hers now, and she would make it her own. She would reshape it, mold it into something new, something powerful. But as she moved, she felt the faintest tug in the air, a shift, a sudden chill that crept through her skin. The shadows around her swirled, darkening, and a low, rasping voice echoed through the room. "You cannot escape, Lena." Lena froze, her hand tightening on the doorframe. She knew that voice. She had heard it before. It was the voice of the house's master, the one who had built it, who had created its dark legacy. It was the voice of the power that still lingered within the house. She turned slowly, her eyes narrowing. The voice seemed to be coming from everywhere, coming from the very walls, from the shadows themselves. The presence was stronger now, more insistent. "You cannot break free of your bloodline. You are bound to me, bound to the house." Lena's chest tightened. The power of the house surged inside her, and she could feel the shadows gathering around her, responding to the call. The house was speaking to her, testing her, reminding her of what she was, what she had been made to be. "I am free," Lena said, her voice strong, her words cutting through the oppressive air. "I am the master of this house, and you are nothing now. You will bow to me." The darkness around her swirled, and for a moment she thought she saw something from the past, a reflection of the master, a shadow of what had once been. But it faded quickly, vanishing into the air as though it had never been. The house groaned, its walls trembling as though something deep within it was resisting her, fighting against the change she was imposing. But Lena stood firm, her hands still resting on the doorframe, her fingers curling as she felt the full weight of her power. "This house is mine," Lena whispered, her voice filled with finality. "And I will make it my own." The shadows recoiled, the power of the house shifting beneath her. The house seemed to pulse with a new energy, a new understanding. It was hers. She was the master of it, and nothing would change that. But deep in the depths of the house, something stirred. Something ancient. Something that had been watching, waiting, as Lena had claimed her throne. And it was waiting for its moment. Lena stood alone in the heart of the house, her breath steady, her hand gripping the doorframe. A sense of finality settling over her. She was the master of the house now. She had broken free from the chains that had once bound her, had cast aside the remnants of the past. The darkness was hers to command, the shadows her servants. Nothing could take that from her. But still, there was something. An echo. A pull. Something deep within the house, something ancient, that had not been defeated, not completely. The legacy of the master, of the house itself, had left its mark on her. And despite everything she had done, despite everything she had claimed, she could still feel it, that tug, that pull, as if the house, in all its ancient power, was still watching her, testing her. She had always known, in the deepest part of her soul, that her victory was never going to be complete. The house had shaped her, had claimed her, just as it had done with all those who had come before. And now, as the true master of the house, she knew that it was not just power that she wielded. It was a legacy, a curse, a gift, something far more dangerous than she had ever realized. The air around her grew colder, the shadows darker. A voice echoed through the empty halls, soft but unmistakable. "You cannot escape, Lena." The words were not spoken aloud. They were felt, deep in her chest, like a vibration she couldn't ignore. She closed her eyes, the weight of them pressing on her, sinking into her bones. She had defeated the master. She had claimed the throne. But the house, this place, this legacy, had never truly been hers. Not yet. Not completely. The darkness, once a part of her, now seemed to swirl with a life of its own, reaching out to her, wrapping itself around her like a shroud. She could feel it, the pull of something ancient, something deep within the house. A presence that was waiting, watching. Something that had always been there, lurking beneath the surface. She had known, on some level, that this wasn't over. There was always something more. Something hidden, something older than even the house itself. A creaking sound came from deep within the walls, a sound so old, so full of dread, that it made the hair on the back of her neck stand on end. She had never heard it before. This was not the usual groaning of the house. This was something different, something ancient. She could feel the ground beneath her feet tremble. The shadows darkened. Lena's heart raced, her instincts screaming at her to leave. But she couldn't. She wouldn't. Not now. She had come so far. The house, for all its power, was hers to command. She would not back down. And then, as the ground beneath her feet rumbled, the walls began to crack, the air thickening with a dark energy that seemed to suffocate everything around her. The shadows gathered, swirling around her, coiling like a storm. The presence that had haunted the house for so long, the one that had birthed the master, that had shaped this place into something twisted and dark, finally made itself known. The walls seemed to bend, and through the cracks, Lena could see it. A figure, not fully formed, but unmistakable. It was the source of the power, the thing that had lived in the house long before her, long before the master. Lena's eyes widened as she saw it. The true master of the house, a being made of shadow and bone, its eyes glowing with a sickly, malevolent light. It was ancient, its form shifting in and out of existence, its presence suffocating, drowning the room in its darkness. She could feel it reaching for her, trying to pull her in. "You think you can control me?" The voice echoed, deep and guttural, like the rumbling of the earth itself. "You are nothing but a child in my house. You will never escape." The figure loomed closer, its shape taking form as it reached toward her, its long, twisted fingers stretching into the shadows. Lena felt the darkness pulling at her, the shadows moving like serpents around her legs, her body. The house itself seemed to be alive, writhing beneath her, trying to claim her once more. But this time, Lena was ready. She stood tall, her chest rising and falling with each breath. Her power surged through her, the house responding to her every command. The shadows, her servants, moved with her will, swirling around her, creating a protective barrier. The house fought back, but Lena would not yield. The darkness that surrounded her seemed to scream, but she ignored it, focusing on the figure in front of her, the true master of the house. She felt the energy of the house, the pulse of its power, flow through her, and with a forceful motion, she extended her hands, her fingers reaching for the figure. "This is my house," she said, her voice steady, filled with the weight of finality. "You no longer control it. You never will again." The darkness recoiled, the figure shuddering as though it were being torn apart. The shadows around her swirled violently, the air thick with energy. The figure writhed, but it could not fight her. The house belonged to her now, and with one final surge of power, Lena extended her will and broke the darkness. The figure screamed, its voice echoing through the walls, shaking the very foundation of the house. And then, with a sudden, deafening silence, it was gone. Lena stood alone, the shadows swirling around her like a protective cocoon. The house was still, the silence heavy in the air. She had won. She had defeated the true master, and the house was finally hers. Its darkness, its hunger, would no longer control her. She was the master. She had broken the legacy of her bloodline, shattered the chains that had bound her to the house, and claimed her place at the top. But even as she stood there, victorious, she knew this was only the beginning. The house would always be with her. The shadows would always follow. It was in her blood. It was a part of her. And as Lena turned to face the house, the shadows shifting at her command, she realized that her true power wasn't in ruling the house. It was in the understanding of it. The house was not just a place. It was a part of the world itself, a living, breathing entity, and she had become a part of that. The house was hers, and with that realization, Lena stepped into the darkness, ready to continue the legacy, her legacy.